On the 3rd of September 1943, the Western Allies commenced their invasion of mainland Italy, with the British 8th Army landing at Reggio Calabria as part of Operation Baytown. 5 days later, on the 8th, it was announced that the Italian government had surrendered and that Italian forces would lay down their arms. On that same day, a force centered around the British 1st Airborne Division set out from Bizerte in Tunisia, with the objective of capturing the port town of Taranto under the codename of Operation Slapstick. Commanded by Major General George Hopkinson, the 1st Airborne Division had been preparing for Slapstick since the 4th of September, when the first orders for the operation were received. However, due to a shortage of transport aircraft, the operation was not to be an airborne assault. Instead, the division was to carry out an amphibious landing at Taranto from 6 Allied warships, which were to ferry the division to its objective in 2 parts. Once ashore, the 1st Airborne was to secure Taranto and its harbour and hold them until reinforcements had arrived. Although they were not trained in amphibious warfare, the paratroopers of the 1st Airborne nonetheless prepared for the operation, and it was on the morning of the 8th of September that they began to embark onto the 6 warships at Bizerte. A divisional report details that loading commenced from the quayside at 1000 hours 8th of September, and with some inevitable confusion was completed by 1700 hours. The Navy showed the utmost cooperation in allowing their decks to be cluttered up with the most heterogeneous collection of vehicles, stores and equipment, and embarked many more personnel than the official figure. Once embarked, the first part of the division set sail in the evening of the 8th, and after a 21-hour voyage, it arrived off the coast of Taranto at around 1400 on the 9th of September. Here, the surrender of the local Italian garrison was received, which cleared the way for the 1st Airborne to enter the town's harbour and commence disembarkation. The divisional report continues. There was no opposition, and the main disembarkation began a few minutes before 2000 hours. The Italian authorities were visited by various staff officers and gave a certain amount of vague, conflicting and generally exaggerated information about the enemy. From the information obtained, it was however clear that there were no Germans left in Taranto, and that apart from naval and signal liaison staffs, they had never been there in any strength. The various reports placed the main German concentrations northwest of the town. By 2300, the 1st Airborne Division had secured Taranto and had established a defensive perimeter around the town, with the 10th and 156th Battalions of the Parachute Regiment deployed to the west, the 4th Battalion to the north, and the 5th Battalion to the east. At around that time, the 6th Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, was beginning to land, when suddenly an explosion ripped through the harbour as HMS Abdiel, on which the 6th Battalion was embarked, struck an underwater mine and sank within 3 minutes. Unfortunately, 130 British personnel lost their lives in this incident, of which 55 belonged to the 6th Battalion, including the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel John Goodwin. As a result of these casualties, the 6th Parachute Regiment was pulled into Divisional Reserve until it could be brought back up to strength. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Goldsmith, who was serving with the 1st Airborne Divisional Headquarters at the time, adds that the sinking of HMS Abdiel also resulted in the loss of the greater part of our ammunition reserve and all of our anti-tank guns. This caused some anxiety, for there was no chance of replacing any of this material for a few days. It imposed a more cautious policy on us than we cared for, as we could not risk provoking a major clash until our ammunition supply was secure. As news was received regarding the loss of HMS Abdiel, Major General George Hopkinson adjusted his divisional plan, with the 4th and 5th Battalions of the Parachute Regiment tasked with taking over the defence of Taranto, whilst the 10th and 156th Battalions were ordered to push out to the west and enlarge the divisional bridgehead. This advance began on the morning of the 10th of September, with the 10th Parachute Regiment capturing the village of Palaggiano without incident. At the same time, the 156th cleared Massafra before encountering a German position at Mottola. Here a brief engagement developed until approximately 1600, when the Germans withdrew and the 156th moved up and occupied the town. The next morning, this battalion continued on and secured the hamlet of San Basilio. Simultaneously, over on the left, the 10th Battalion advanced out from Palaggiano on the 11th of September, with a view of capturing Castellaneta. However, throughout the day, the battalion was held up by a number of enemy roadblocks, and it wasn't until evening that the British paratroopers established themselves on the southern outskirts of the town. It was in this area, during a visit to the 10th Battalion, that Major General Hopkinson was shot in the head by a German machine gun and had to be evacuated to a hospital in Taranto. Here, he sadly died of his wounds on the 12th of September 1943, with Brigadier Ernest Down assuming command of the 1st Airborne Division. Although the loss of Major General George Hopkinson was a huge blow, operations around Taranto continued apace, and it was on the 12th of September that the 10th Parachute Regiment swept through and cleared Castellaneta. That same day, the second part of the division arrived at Taranto, including the 1st Battalion, the Border Regiment, the 2nd Battalion, the South Staffordshire Regiment, and the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the Parachute Regiment, all of which disembarked without incident and took up defensive positions around the town and its harbour. This then freed the 4th and 5th Battalions to move west and take over the sector of the front at Castellaneta, which in turn enabled the 10th Battalion to be shifted over to reinforce the position at Mottola. From here, the 10th, together with the 156th Battalion, pushed out patrols towards Noci and Gioia de Col, the former of which was found to be clear of the enemy and was later occupied by a small British force from the 15th of September. However, on the night of the 13th of September, a company-sized patrol from the 10th Parachute Regiment bumped into a significant German force at Gioia, where one of the platoons was ambushed and became pinned down in the town centre. Over the course of that night, heavy fighting ensued, and it wasn't until 0730 on the 14th that the company managed to extract itself out of the town and return to British lines, with 3 paratroopers being killed in the engagement and a further 6 being wounded. 3 days later, on the 17th, the 156th Battalion probed towards Gioia and discovered that the Germans had abandoned the area, leaving just booby traps and mines scattered throughout the town and on the nearby airfield. Meanwhile, the 21st Independent Parachute Company had infiltrated its way into the port town of Barry on the 14th of September, whilst in the sector held by the 4th Parachute Regiment, the battalion's B Company mounted a patrol on the night of the 15th in the direction of Laterza, with a divisional report detailing that, crossing a valley, the troops were observed by the enemy in the moonlight, and they opened fire at 300 yards with machine guns and 20mm guns from a hill on the company's right flank. As the whole company was in the field of fire, the company commander ordered an immediate attack on the hill. In spite of resistance, all 3 platoons reached the guns and closed with the bayonet. The enemy later withdrew his remaining guns and men in half-tracked vehicles. The company claimed 31 enemy killed and 19 wounded, for the loss of 1 killed, 1 missing and 9 wounded. The company returned to our lines at 0815 hours on the 16th of September, borrowing 2 farm carts on the way to carry the wounded. After a few more days of patrolling, the men of the 4th Parachute Regiment eventually advanced and secured Laterza on the 19th of September. Elsewhere, an SAS detachment, which was temporarily under divisional command, pushed down the coastal road and established contact with the lead elements of the British 8th Army on the 16th of September. With this link-up, the position of the 1st Airborne Division was secured, and the first reinforcements began to be deployed into the Taranto region, including the British 78th Division, which arrived on the 19th, the British 4th Armoured Brigade, which disembarked on the 23rd, and the Indian 8th Division, which arrived on the 24th. As these reinforcements poured in, intelligence reports indicated that the Germans were withdrawing into central Italy, and so Brigadier Ernest Down directed part of the 1st Airborne to give chase, whilst the other half remained behind at Taranto. Moving out from their positions, the paratroopers quickly occupied the towns of Altamura and Acquaviva on the 23rd of September. From here, the Airborne, alongside elements of the 78th Division, continued their advance north against minimal enemy resistance, and it was at 0915 on the 27th of September 1943 that the 21st Independent Parachute Company entered the city of Foggia, with the 1st Border Regiment and the 2nd South Staffordshire Regiment following up closely behind to secure the area. At this juncture, the 78th Division took over the advance, and the 1st Airborne was relieved of its duties on the front line. The division then spent the next 2 months in concentration areas around Taranto until late November 1943, when it received orders to return to Britain and prepare for the Allied invasion of Normandy. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe so that you never miss one of my future videos.